I'm looking forward to tonight's show. This is an exceptional time for us to do a show. We have not done one, like Curtis said, on a Monday for a while, but we needed to do this because we were having just an awesome time with our brother Timothy Alberino last Saturday of this weekend, and Brother Timmy was on a roll, and we abruptly got disconnected, cut off, shut down. I don't know, but that was unfortunate because Brother Timothy was in the process of sharing some very important things, and this is no exception tonight. So without further ado, I want to bring our friend on tonight and ask the Lord Jesus to use him in the Holy Spirit's power and in whatever direction he desires to go. So, Brother Timothy, we want to welcome you tonight back to the Pine Ridge Warriors radio show.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Well, you're always welcome, man of God. You were on a roll last Saturday, and like I said, something technical happened. I don't know. I'm not the technician here, so anyway, but we wanted to bring you back on to see if we could finish. No, I think it's the company that we keep. No, but seriously, you were. We got a lot of good response, by the way, Brother Timothy. Through the email, and in fact, even a letter that I just received today, talking about the connection that they're so pleased that we've made together in the Lord for His purposes. So with that said, brother, I'm going to give you the floor and let you speak as the Lord gives you the grace to tonight.
Actually, Marcus, we didn't get to what I really wanted to talk to you about last week. It was my fault because I went on a handful of rants. But I would actually like you, if you're willing, to tell everybody the story about the black-eyed children.
Absolutely.
That's something that you would do.
Absolutely, Brother Timothy. This is not something that I've shared, I don't think at length. It's something that caught me by surprise. And I'm going to have to be quite frank and honest. I have not taken the time to really pursue any personal research or investigation beyond what I experienced myself. I do know there are incidences out there occurred with this type of phenomenon, but I want to share tonight what happened to me several months ago. We had just came back from an afternoon church service here on the reservation, and we were having, at that particular time, Sunday afternoon services for the people that live here on the reservation. And I had just got back home. Probably I was here for about not more than an hour. And I got a phone call from a family that lives here on the reservation, and for the sake of their privacy, I'm not going to give any specific names or locations tonight because they deserve that privacy, but they called me, and I could tell in the tone of voice that they were, talking in that something serious had happened. And of course, my mind began to flash with, the things that happen here on a regular basis in the reservation. It could be any number of things. But I knew that I had to respond to that particular call as soon as I could. So I drove to the location of the household. And when I got there, there was adults and children both that were at this particular location. And the adults were very serious. They were quite stoic-faced, actually, and having been through what they've been through, I could see why as they began to expound on the story. But I began to listen to the adults talk first, and not even at midstream, I shut them down, and then I began to, ask the children present, some questions, and then I stopped again, Timothy. And what I decided to do, I wanted at that point to the adults and the children and separate them, because where they were going with what they have said was something that I have never, until that time, had to contend with, experience, or deal with. So I did that, and if I'm not mistaken, at that point, too, in this whole drama that was going on, one of our intercessors and Brother Curtis actually had went out on the property of the household, and they began to look around, and they actually came across some kind of unique things, and I'll get to that here in just a moment. But going back to the adults and the children began to explain to me, Brother Timothy, and again, like I said, this was new territory for me. And I was somewhat skeptical at first, I have to admit that. And when the children began to describe to me about certain kinds of playmates that just simply appeared on the property, children, and the children that appeared to the children that I knew were, according to the explanation of the children, wanting very insistently to enter into the house because they were there to get food. And as I began to listen to the children, they began to explain how this had happened, at least 2, if not 3 times consecutively over a short period of time. Now, fortunately, these children that they came to did not let them in the house because at that particular time there were some other things going on in the community, which I won't go into at this time. But anyway, the parents had instructed them not to let any strangers in or not have nobody over at their home during a certain time frame. But the children began to, again, explain not only did these real-looking type children who appeared to them seemingly out of nowhere, not only were they insistent to come into the household, but they were wanting food. And the description that they gave to me, it was not it was a succinct description, and not many details. But the 2 things that stood out was, again, in respect to these children, was the coloration of the children. And the children, I don't think, knew how to describe exactly, what they were, saying. But if I had to describe it based on what they told me, it was like an ash-looking type color of skin that all these children had. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they said there was 2 that showed up the first time, and then the other 2 consecutive times, I think they said there were 3. Now, what scared the children and what made them tell their parents, who I went back to and talked to later and found out a lot more information, was that the last time that these children showed up on their property, these children that had the ash-looking skin and the black eyes, they went from demanding food, and if I understood correctly what these children were saying, they were asking for some type of blood. And I've never heard that before, and so, again, this was something new to me. So when I went back to talk to the parents, the children had described to them prior to me coming there, a few days prior, exactly what the children had told me. So that part of the story lined up between the children and the adults. The descriptions, were basically the same, because what I found out was not only did the children see them 3 times, but the adults who were in the house at that time, and you have to understand out here on the reservation, sometimes you find, an extended family type situation. It might be the regular household plus you've got relatives or even an extended family, staying there. And this particular family, tended to have a lot of, people living there off and on at times, and a lot of people that come there, including other kids from other neighborhoods. But the adults began to not only validate the description of these black-eyed children, but the adults in the household also began to testify to me how they had been through a series. And this is not a one-time thing that was happening, apparently, but they had been through a series where they not only had seen the black-eyed children themselves on one occasion, but then also in the household, they had begun to, and I'm going to use the terms they used, experience not only like paranormal type activity, but a couple of the adults actually had described what you would call an alien type entity that had showed up at the house at least on 2 occasions inside. Now, not just what was happening on or inside the household, Brother Timothy, but also as well, during that time, there were, reports again from this particular family and friends of the family of animals in that particular area just, showing up and never coming back. And then at one point, Brother Curtis, at another point of time, he and one of our prayer intercessors, who has since moved to Florida, they actually had found a noose very close to a little stream that was adjacent to the property that was experiencing all these kinds of paranormal activities, sounds in the house, black-eyed children, alien-described entities. And people that know me, they know that I've, dealt with a lot of things in the spirit realm. But they also know that I'm, very skeptical. I just don't buy into anything that I'm told by people. I try to use the discerning of the Holy Spirit to test the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. But I came to the conclusion that what the children and the adults said to me separately was something very real that this whole family had experienced. You could see the shock, the trauma in the speech and the attitude, because apparently right prior to them calling me that Sunday afternoon, something else had just happened, which, I won't go into at this point. I'll go into it a little bit later here. But they were afraid because they were terrified for the children, obviously, because when the children told them that the, insistence of coming into the house and these other children wanting initially food, but then, if I'm not mistaken, they said blood, well, that scared the daylights out of the parents. And again, this particular family knows me and Curtis of ministering here on the reservation. We've cast out spirits out of people here on the reservation. We went in and dealt with demonic entities actually vexing households, and they knew that. And so what I ended up doing is I said, well, here's what we have to do. First of all, I believe that we can deal with this, but not in our own strength or wisdom. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a hold of, everyone that's here that has seen these things and that has personally encountered them. And we're going to do a short series of Bible studies. And I need to explain to this household from the Word of God what these entities are, what I believe they are. Now, again, with the black-eyed children, I had never had dealt with anything like that before. But I went in to the family's house again, I think about 3 days later. And we ended up having a few Bible studies there because I wanted to explain the premise of deliverance, but the necessity of them becoming born again through the blood of Jesus and the repenting of their sins, which is the basis of their protection and security in the Lord. Because irrespective of what we cast out or deal with, if a person who has had their own personal temple or their house or their body cleansed of evil spirits, these things want to come back. And when they do, they want to come back sevenfold, 7 times worse than they were before, which makes the latter state of that man worse than before. So we went through a couple of series of Bible studies. We prayed a prayer of repentance for the household, which we asked everybody to engage in. And then at a later point, myself and a brother named Choctaw and his wife went back to the property and went through the entire house, every room, every corner. And I'm not going to I was going to go into this, but I'm not going to go into all the details right now. But long story short, in certain rooms, we encountered some, unusual markings and some other significant signs to us that, that there had been some things that had transpired. And it went back to some things that the adults had described that they had seen in the household, things that they'd heard. And so anyway, we anointed the windows, the doors, the house, the bedrooms, went through, prayed, and asked the Holy Spirit to give us discerning of spirits with anything that might have been there. And we were probably there for about an entire hour before we actually felt a release or a liberty from the oppression that was there. Now, having shared that with you, Brother Timothy, we also heard, and I was not personally involved in this one, but it seemed to come from the same time frame. After my encounter with that one family and their being visited by these black-eyed children, there was a couple reports, if I'm not mistaken, from two independent sources about some sightings of black-eyed children just across the state line as you enter into the state of Nebraska, right below the southern part of the reservation here. And I did not really pursue following up on that, I have to admit. But what this has done, Brother Timothy, is really brought me to a place where, I'm seeing that there are obviously doors or gates that are open upon this reservation that we are seeing, some unusual things manifest. And in conversation with you, I think I've told you a couple of things that I've encountered out here. And it's been not weekly, not necessarily monthly, but when it comes, seems like in waves or streams. And one of the most significant things that happened out here was with the what I would call a open portal or stargate adjacent to the property here, which happened to me on the 28th of February, the same night that Brother Steve Quayle and Greg Everson were on the radio discussing us and our ministry and our situation here. But back with the family, that family was, absolutely concerned about the encounter their children had with these black-eyed children, ash or pale-looking colored skin. I would use the term ash-looking. And if it had not been for the description of the black eyes, I would probably not have paid as much attention as I did to that part of the story. Probably more, focused on the, paranormal or the demonic entities that were oppressing the people that they would see manifest right inside the house. And then, of course, they were concerned about, missing pets and some other things that happened there. But that's what I experienced in my deal with this particular family. And I have to say, since that time, Brother Timothy, we've had a few other calls, and I'll be, moderate here. We've had a few other calls in respect to people wanting us to come and pray over their house and their property, because, the small community, in a sense, word gets around fast, and people know, they've seen now the power of God, they've seen the delivering hand of Jesus, and they see what can happen if they will in fact embrace the Lord, repent of sin, cleanse themselves, purge themselves, break some things off their property and off themselves as well. So that's my encounter, and I'm sure you may have a lot more insight and understanding than I do in that particular arena. And if you do, please enlighten me tonight. I'm sorry.
I have a question for you. Did anyone have any details concerning the hair of these little children, of these black-eyed children?
Well, it's interesting you ask that, because not my initial visit, but when I went back the first time we had Bible study there, I spoke to one of the sisters of the family that lived there, and she had happened to be present the first time that her sister had seen the black-eyed children, and she was called by her to come out and look. And long story short, she ended up telling me that it was, for the lack of a better word, black as black could be. And when she alluded to the eyes, it's like, she was looking into, and I forgot the exact word she used. It might have been something like a black hole or an abyss, type thing, but it definitely struck her as being, something beyond just something normal. But as far as the hair color, she, basically said black as black can be. Now, that's one thing I did not hear about the secondary story in Nebraska. But that was her description of what she had seen when her sister called her in there to look out the window to behold the children. And
now you said that the skin was a chalky white.
Yeah.
Did you get the impression that these children were in appearance were Caucasian, or were they in appearance more Native American but with chalky white skin, or do you not have those details?
I would have to say basically they didn't give any distinction of race. but with the pale, what I called ash-looking type skin, I don't think that they were alluding to Native children in particular, and I don't know if these entities, come in cultural forms or how they come. But one thing, let me mention this and throw this in there as well. The speech or the talk that these children engaged in with the children, it was, and I'm using my words to describe to the best of my ability their explanation, but it was almost mechanically monotoned or in a tone where it was not normal type speech, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it was monotone and robotic.
Yeah, I think, that's a good word, robotic. Yeah, that's a good word.
The reason why I'm asking you these specific questions is because as you're telling the story, and I had already heard this story from you, I'm cross-referencing in my mind the other stories that I've heard, and some other accounts that involve these kind of black-eyed children. And this is pretty much a quintessential case of Becks or black-eyed kids or black-eyed children. Some people say black-eyed kids, some people say black-eyed children. It's generally considered to be a wives' tale, an urban legend, but it is not an urban legend. And remember, Marcus, when you were telling me, you didn't tell me their eyes were black. I told you their eyes were black. In other words, I said their eyes were black, weren't they? Right? And you confirmed.
Oh, yeah, that's what this one lady's sister said. Not just the uniqueness of the abyss black-looking type eyes, but the black as black hair. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because as soon as you were telling me the story, in the beginning you didn't tell me that their eyes were black, but I instantly knew because it's so quintessential, because this story fits in exactly with all the other stories I've heard and read about in research. I knew that you were dealing with the black-eyed children. Now let me give you what. Now this is probably going to blow some of your listeners away, but I'll give you my opinion on what this is. Basically, in many of these accounts, you have children that are exactly as you described them. They have a chalky, whitish skin. They have overly large heads. Usually their eyes, besides being black with no white in their eyes, are larger. Their eye sockets are larger. Usually they have very straggly hair. Their hair is very straggly and sparse on their head, and it comes in different colors. And oftentimes they are presented or there is an attempt to present these black-eyed children in the same ethnicity as the other children that they're encountering or the other adults that they're encountering. And what I think is happening here is, and again, this will probably blow some of your listeners away, but I believe that for many years now there's been a breeding program going on. And this isn't my own exclusive opinion. You'll find this opinion across the board in ufology. And I don't agree with all the details. There's a lot of different people who have a lot to say about the black-eyed children. Most people consider them to be urban legends, an urban legend. And it's just like the Illuminati. The black-eyed children of the Becks have been integrated into popular culture. So it's become somewhat of a trendy topic to talk about Becks or black-eyed children. And so the phenomenon of the black-eyed children or the black-eyed kids has been conveniently filed away into urban legend, right next to Bigfoot and UFOs and gray aliens, all of which are 100% factual. So the interesting thing here is that I have a very strong indication that what's going on is that this is a breeding program that's been underway for a long time, for years and for centuries, actually. There seems to be an attempt to create a human facsimile, of a human child, and it seems that they're trying to integrate see if they can integrate their facsimile, their copy, their clone, their hybrid is what it ultimately is of a human child. I think that's one aspect of this, and I'll get to who they are in a moment. But what really intrigues me. So
this is now a recent phenomenon, then.
No.
This is
well,
okay.
the black-eyed kids. The black-eyed kids has recently, within the last 5 years, become a topic. Like I said, a trendy topic of urban legend. But no, the idea of these strange children showing up, it goes back at least, I think, to the I'm just shooting in the dark right now, but I would guess it goes back to the 60s at least, just from some of the stuff I've read. However, it is far more prevalent now than it's ever been. Just like the UFO activity has increased. In other words, these vehicles that people are seeing, these aeronautical vehicles that people are seeing have increased, and other phenomenon, sightings of Bigfoot have increased. Basically, everything paranormal is increasing. And people can say, well, it's because there's over 7 billion people on the planet, or around 7 billion people on the planet, and everybody's got cell phones and with the cameras and the video capabilities, which is true. That's a logical point. Mm-hmm. But generally speaking, even taking away all the cameras and even reducing the population of the Earth, we know that the phenomenon is increasing because in the populated areas where people have been for years and years and years, even in those areas, there are more sightings being reported by the by MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and by the other organizations that are tracking these things. I mean, you can do research and find that across the board, UFO activity, alien abduction activity, Bigfoot activity, all of this stuff is increasing. It's burgeoning, and there's a reason for that. I think that. Well, let me get back to the. Let me try to stay on topic this time, and address this issue of these black-eyed children because it is intriguing. It's really, really intriguing. Basically, I was getting into last time we were on the show. Last time I was on your show, I was getting into artificial insemination, abductions and artificial insemination. Okay. In other words, for those who are in your audience who aren't familiar with the topic of alien abductions, first of all, let me say unequivocally that the phenomenon of alien abduction is absolutely real. It is frightening. It is tangible. It is something that is happening, I believe, and so do many other researchers who are far more adept at what they do than I am, have come out with astounding figures that right now on this planet, just in the United States, let's say, let's dwindle down just to the United States, there are literally millions of people being abducted on a weekly or monthly basis in the United States. Almost all of them are abducted, usually at nighttime, not always at nighttime, but usually in the night. In other words, they're taken from their bed, and they are physically taken. They're not just spiritually taken. We're not just talking about the soul being projected out of the body or something like that. We're talking about a very tangible phenomenon where they are literally carried away, and most of the time they're brought into what people would term a UFO. They're brought into a very high-tech vehicle, aeronautical vehicle that's sometimes sitting over in a cornfield or something, or sometimes it's hovering in the atmosphere, and they're actually gone. They're not just gone in spirit, they're gone. Their body is gone. And if they have somebody sleeping next to them, their husband or their wife, that person is usually either sometimes they're taken as well, or more often than not, they're in a comatose state. They're in a sleep that they can't be woken from. And this has been so well documented. That's why I can speak with such confidence about it. It has been so well documented. I mean, there is so much evidence. And when I say evidence, to prove that the abduction phenomenon is real. We're talking physical evidence. We're talking the kind of evidence that is valid in a court of law. We're talking about the kind of evidence that far exceeds the amount of quote-unquote evidence that scientists have for evolution, for example, or for global warming, or for a lot of these other ridiculous things that they're basically extrapolating and making postulations and speculations based on really nothing. Whereas in the abduction phenomenon, you have every kind of evidence that you can possibly ask for. You have, of course, eyewitness account. You have firsthand eyewitness account. You have physical evidence in the form of actual physical evidence on the body, markings, cuts, scars where it looks like surgical incisions have been made. You have sometimes little scoops of skin that are removed from the body. You have triangular shapes that seem to be carved into the skin. Sometimes you have unknown foreign substances on the body that are brought to labs and cannot be classified, and you can only really see them under infrared light or something like that. We're talking the physical evidence. Again, that would convict somebody in a court of law. You have one of the most astounding things is you have implants. You actually have small, usually metallic mechanisms, and I call them mechanisms because they're placed into certain places in the human body, sometimes behind the neck, sometimes behind the ear, sometimes up the nasal passage, up near the frontal lobe or the cerebral cortex. And these little mechanisms, and they're usually smaller than an inch in diameter. These little I should probably say a centimeter rather than an inch. They come in various sizes, but these little mechanisms, sometimes when they try and extract them, they take evasive action. I mean, these little implants, they actually take evasive action and move away from the tweezers or whatever instrument that the doctor is inserting to grab them. I'm not saying that they're alive; they're mechanized. So
Brother Timothy, hold your thought there for just 1 second, because I want the listeners to know tonight that Curtis and myself, we recently had Brother Eli Mazzulli on our program as one of our guests, and Timothy, what you're talking about tonight, he has had actually documented through experimentation and research himself, and what you're saying is 100% correct. This is not some fantasy. This is factual. It's happening.
Yes, absolutely. And it's amazing when you begin to study this, when you begin to research the abduction phenomenon. Forget about the UFOs and even forgetting about the aliens involved. Just the abduction phenomenon, that people are being taken somewhere by something and are being subjected to all kinds of bizarre procedures and having implants. When you actually sit down and look at the evidence, there is no way that a rational human being can take the time, look at the evidence, after discarding all the stuff that might be hearsay, that doesn't fit, getting rid of all the garbage or all the questionable stuff, and just being left with the raw data, the undeniable raw data. There is no way that a rational human being can walk away denying that the abduction phenomenon is real. It's not imagined. It's not some kind of psychosis. It is tangible. It is a phenomenon that is happening, that is engaging every level of the abductees' senses, including their eyes, their ears, the sense of touch, their memories in many cases. Again, they literally are absent from where they were before they were abducted for a certain amount of time. People refer to that as missing time. There are witnesses. Listen, there are witnesses that have come forth that have witnessed people being taken out of their homes, literally their bodies being drawn out of their homes, usually enveloped in a beam of light, and being extracted and basically going up into craft. And then there is corroborating evidence and testimony in these cases where artifacts are found or evidences on these people's bodies after the fact. So you have eyewitnesses, you have physical evidence, you have missing time. Again, the only level of evidence that's missing in this case, and I guarantee you it's not missing, it's been confiscated, it's not missing, is actual video of this happening and being put on CNN or Fox News. And I say that because actual video of this happening has been recorded and confiscated. So people need to understand that when we talk about alien abductions, it is not a laughing matter. We're not talking about something that is worthy of jest or to snicker about. This is something that is deadly serious and that really causes a lot of trauma to those who have been subjected to abduction.
Timothy, let me just interrupt. Let me just interrupt real quickly here, and excuse me, but I've got to ask this. Now, with the people that have encountered these situations in respect to alien abduction, have any of these people at any time been subject to any kind of visit by real flesh and blood people after their encounter, and perhaps they were questioned or even threatened, or stuff, material taken from them? Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, for some of the abductees, which there are millions just in the United States alone. I mean, globally, we're talking possibly 1 billion or more people who are being abducted. And these aren't I'm not just firing numbers out of my brain right now. According to the research, and by the way, the research from, especially in the arena of abductions, is erudite. It's not whimsical research. It's not just surfing the internet. We're talking about, before the internet was around, people doing gumshoe type investigations where they're tracking people down, doing very, very thorough investigations, collecting data for years, and then of course when the internet came online, corroborating the data and collecting such a pile of evidence that it's overwhelming. So to your point, the number one investigator of alien abduction is the U.S. military, without a question. The U.S. military has not, and this is the reality. The U.S. military, and not the military, that you see on TV, not the military that we send to Afghanistan or to Iraq, not the Marines. We're talking about the black military, the military that's working in the deep black realm, where they're operating with a black budget, where there's 5-star plus generals who nobody knows about, who have access to information that is classified higher than what the president has classification for. We're talking about majestic level classification stuff. Basically, when you get into certain realms of classification, the highest levels of classification deal with the alien phenomenon, UFOs, and they're not really UFOs at this point. They're not unidentified flying objects. We've identified them. The military knows what they are and is reverse engineering them. And I have seen this craft that the military is reverse engineering. I am an eyewitness and can testify, and I have and I wasn't alone. I have a witness that was with me when I observed what I believe had to be reverse engineered technology, because it was using propulsionary systems, the likes of which are not even supposed to exist. We're talking Star Trek stuff. So basically the military, again, when I say the military, I'm talking about black ops military, behind the scenes, that people are not even aware of. Stuff that's deeper than the CIA, that goes deeper than the CIA, although the CIA is involved in some of this. The NSA is involved in a lot more. Listen, there are organizations that are connected and associated with our government, with the federal government of the United States, that nobody even knows about besides certain members in Congress. I'm talking about organizations that are receiving funding from black from the black budget. By the way, the black budget gets a lot of its money from nefarious activity. And when I say nefarious activity, I'm talking about the most despicable, disgusting activity that human beings are involved in, including human trafficking and drug trafficking. That's where a lot of the money comes from, the black projects. In fact, the CIA got busted on that. We won't go into that, but the CIA absolutely got busted on it back in the 90s and came out and had to admit that they got busted on it. But most people don't pay attention to that kind of stuff. So back to your question. The military involvement in some cases for some abductees has been far more oppressive even than the actual abductees themselves, these non-human creatures. The military involvement is actually, there's something called a MILAB. MILAB stands for military abduction, because what happened was the military was monitoring the abductions. They had a list of all the abductees, and they had their phones tapped. They were watching them very closely because the military was trying to figure out what the aliens' agenda was for abducting these people. And they were not friendly with the people at all. In fact, it wasn't a cooperative thing between them and the abductees. They were very aggressive. Oftentimes, somebody would be subjected to an alien abduction, and the military would be monitoring and would know it was happening, probably were filming it in some cases, definitely monitoring it in some fashion, maybe from space. And then after the abductee was returned to their bed or wherever, their car or whatever, the military would swoop in and drug the person and drag them away to some base, usually an underground base, where they would be interrogated and drugged, sometimes subjected to horrible situations, such as if they weren't willing to divulge what happened to them in the abduction, they would be forced to put their hands on a trigger and kill somebody. In other words, they would subject them to trauma to try and break them down, because they were trying to understand what these entities, these non-human entities, were doing with them. And that is a fact. That is a fact. And there's so much. Listen, Marcus, so many good investigators, so many good researchers and good people have lost their lives investigating this, that it is an injustice to talk about this as if it's a fairy tale or as if it might be happening. It is happening. Hundreds of people have been murdered because they tried to expose it. I mean, the list of people, Steve Quayle on his website has that part of his website where he catalogs all the dead scientists that have been murdered involving biological weapons and usually involving biological weapons. That's the primary reason most of them were murdered. If you go and look at Steve's website, and I encourage people to do that, because he has he's really cataloged all of these scientists. He has a section called Dead Scientists. And in the same way that they've been literally eliminating anyone that has had close enough ties with the biological weapons programs, such as the weaponized Ebola that's been released recently, they will just go in and murder them. They'll get rid of the witnesses and they'll get rid of any evidence. Well, they were doing that even more so in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s, with abductees and abduction researchers. Now, understand. I want everybody to understand. You can go on YouTube right now. There is a video on YouTube. There is a hearing in Congress. I can't remember the details. I don't have that great of a memory for names and numbers, but there was a hearing in Congress, I think it was in the 90s, where they admitted, I believe it was the CIA, an agent of the CIA was being interrogated by a committee and had to fess up to the fact. Now listen to this. It's on YouTube. People can go and Google this. That they had developed a gun which could discharge a projectile that was too small for the human eye to see, that had a drop of on the end of this needle that was discharged from this gun. There was a needle and like a little arrow, basically, and on the end of it was a frozen drop of a substance. I don't remember what the substance was. They give all the details in the hearing, that could induce a heart attack instantly. Okay? The CIA admitted to, I think it was Congress or a special committee of Congress, that they had developed a gun that they could shoot you with. You would have no idea that you had been struck by the ballistics of this weapon, and you would have a heart attack. It would induce a heart attack. The chemical, the frozen bead on the tip of this projectile would warm up in your bloodstream and release this chemical into your bloodstream, and it would give you a heart attack, and you would die. And of course,
incredible.
He died of natural causes, right? That would be the point of that. You can kill people without. Exactly. They died of natural causes. They had a heart attack. Well, believe me, that was, by the way, that was either in the 80s or the 90s, okay? Now, believe me that they have the same, that they have perfected that technology at this point in time, and they can do the same with cancer, aggressive forms of cancer, obviously AIDS, Ebola, and whatever else they want to do it with, okay? We're dealing with, and that's just to show you, the reason why I'm talking about that is I want to illustrate to people that, you hear about somebody researching something and being controversial, and then suddenly they die of a heart attack, right? Remember Breitbart? I forget his first name.
Oh, yes.
He was going to come out with some information on Barack Obama, some game-changing information concerning Barack Obama, and of course he mysteriously dies. I believe I think they called it a heart attack. I know they tried to say it was natural causes. I don't know where that investigation went or what they ended up determining, but they were trying to make it look like it was natural causes.
Wasn't that the brother that was actually investigating his birth certificate, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, it wasn't just his birth certificate. It was he actually announced he had information that was going to be damning to the Obama administration, and basically they whacked him for it. And so I'm just using that as another illustration.
Wasn't there one of the coroners that was also involved in the Breitbart investigation? Didn't something mysteriously happen to one of them also as well?
I believe so. Yeah, his name was Andrew Breitbart, by the way, and he died on March 1st, 2012.
Correct.
There was all kinds of stuff associated with that. Of course, it got swept under the rug very quickly. And so, in other words, they can kill people quite easily now without even getting close to them. Now, and we have actually, you referenced, oh God, I just drew a blank on his name. You referenced Steve Quayle, and who was Steve talking to when the Stargate opened? You were listening to them on the radio? I forget the brother's name.
This is something I witnessed myself here on the reservation on February the 28th.
Right, but who were you listening to on the radio? You were listening to Steve, and I always
what
forget his name.
It was Greg Everson.
Greg Everson, that's right. Yeah.
That night, and see, I didn't find out till after the fact, Timothy. I had came into my office that night. My dog had came into the office, and he lay down on the floor. And can I take just a minute to share this real quick?
Sure, go ahead.
And so I ended up laying down on the floor by my dog, and all of a sudden my dog jumps up, and he begins to get very sick, and actually ends up, but just puking on the floor. And then he began to run around the office, and he began to stop and look out the smallest of two windows in the office. And when I jumped up off the floor, it felt like something hit me in the chest with just a great amount of weight and intensity. But beyond that, what was strange is, beyond my dog acting crazy and acting sick, is there was something that was tangibly felt in the atmosphere, Timothy, that you could feel. It wasn't nothing good. And so the last time my dog went to the window, I went to see what he was trying to, because he acted like he was trying to, look out and get out. So I looked out that window, and it just happens to be the window that's adjacent to this place close to our property here. It's a place called Window Rock. And there are some very unusual, traditional tales about the specific place. But long story short, when I looked out, I saw 3 illuminated green orbs, not dropping down and coming through the round formation of rock. And I mean, it is exactly round. But there were 3 of them, and they went up to, the sky and just began to, shoot forward like projectiles. And that's the same night that Brother Steve Quell and Greg Everson had been on the radio talking about the ministry we have here, what we do, and some of the needs we have. I didn't know that till a friend of mine emailed me earlier that morning, and he told me that Steve and Greg had been on. And so shortly after that, I contacted Greg, and I believe I emailed Steve about that situation, if I'm not mistaken. But that's another thing, Timothy, that plays into all this somehow as well, is these open portals and stargates, that these things are coming through. And
absolutely,
we're coming up to our first break here. I want you to continue on, and then in the next hour, Tim, I would like to just, ask you about a man named Phil Schneider, and then also I'd like to share just briefly a story about a friend of mine who's since passed away, and I believe I mentioned to you about him as Ted Gunderson.
Mm-hmm.
And then in this next hour, please take your time, and you're doing a great job. This is something that we as believers in Jesus need to be made aware of, like Timothy's making us aware of tonight. We can go into our prayer closet, we can, sing praises to Jesus, we can worship God in truth and in spirit, but yet be dumb and ignorant of what's really transpiring in the world around us, and most importantly, why, and what is the end game agenda. And we're going to get into that as soon as we come back from our first break. Timothy, great job. Thank you. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Well, praise the Lord, Brother Curtis. That's a flute marathon. Thank you.
I don't know how well I did that, man. I'm sitting here trying to doze off after a good meal and a hot shower earlier, and whew, it was hard to keep my breath.
Well, Brother Timothy, welcome back to our show tonight, and this first hour has been fantastic. I want to go back just to a couple of points real quick, and the people that have experienced these alien-type abductions, these are not mental crackpots. These are people that sometimes have worked in the highest of military or government or law enforcement or medical or scientific communities, as well as common everyday people who are grounded and stable. They're not mental crackpots. And I want you just to, address that, if you would, just for a moment, then go on to where you want to take us tonight. But the people need to know that the people who have these experiences, are coming from diverse backgrounds, but there is a consistency in their experiences.
Yes, it's true. I mean, the abduction phenomenon touches every sphere of society, rich and poor, educated, uneducated. There is a common thread, and I'll address that in a little while. Let me finish I brought up Greg Everson. I couldn't remember what his name was, but Greg Everson was here in Bozeman in the spring for the Whitestone Remnant Conference, and I really enjoyed listening to Greg. And he told the audience a really astounding story that I wanted to relate very quickly to show people that these things are happening. And when I say these things, I'm specifically referring to the military oppressing people and killing people who get too close to the truth. Because Greg Everson has actually experienced and been involved in a lot of classified things that he doesn't talk about on the radio. But anyways, Greg related a story that I don't remember all the details. People can go and listen to the DVDs. They can purchase them on stevequayle.com from the conference and listen to Greg's whole presentation. But they can probably find this story somewhere online too. But Greg, one day, in a nutshell, and I'm going to leave out all the details, but in a nutshell, Greg was sitting in his house one day, and somebody shot him in the forehead. Not exactly in the forehead, above one of his eyes, above one of his brows, I think, eyebrows, with some kind of a device. And he actually saw the weapon being discharged from the forest because he had some woods around his house, and he was struck with this, whatever it was, and he started to have, and basically what appeared to be what I think he thought was an aneurysm. So they basically tried to fry the man's brains. So when we talk about people being taken out with these high-tech devices, the one I referred to that the CIA had to admit that they had, the one that induces a heart attack, or alternatively the kind of weapon that was used against Greg Everson, we're talking about reality. We're talking about people who have paid the ultimate price for coming out with the details and telling the truth about this stuff that have been suppressed and oppressed and in some cases terminated by this shadowy military group that's working in the black budget and in the black projects world. So now let me tie all of this back in before I get too far off track here. So the reason why I got to that story concerning Greg Everson was because we were talking about the military's involvement. And I mentioned the term MILAB, which stands for military abductions, because what happened was the military was monitoring, as I said, the abduction phenomenon, especially in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, monitoring the abduction phenomenon, tapping the phones of the abductees and surveilling the abductees in a very oppressive way. Sometimes an abduction would happen, and like I said, after the aliens were done with the person, the military would come and subject the person again to a very forceful interview. Sometimes black helicopters would show up above the people's house, and military personnel would swamp the property and basically confiscate any artifacts, any evidence that was left over. And what the military actually began to do was they began staging their own abductions. And this is really insidious. We're getting into some very dark stuff here. The military would actually begin to perpetrate abductions and blame it on aliens and masquerade as aliens. And so the military was beginning to copy the abduction protocols of these aliens, and they were doing that for a number of reasons, involving mind control, involving a lot of experimental technology that they were using. The military was trying, one of the things that the military was really interested in was figuring out what the implants were, what the purpose and function of the implant was, and they wanted to reverse engineer it. They wanted to be able to develop their own implants. And so,
wow.
And there is some legend about this, and I can't verify that this is true. I happen to believe it is, that there's actually some sort of an agreement signed between President Eisenhower and a non-human faction that gave this particular faction of non-humans the right or the leave to abduct a certain amount of human beings, a certain amount of Americans specifically, in exchange for technology. So there has been an exchange of technology between the human race and non-human entities, and it's not the first time it's happened.
That's right.
This was, and I'm not going to go into all the roots, the Genesis 6 roots and all that. But anyways, tying this back into the black-eyed children, I mentioned that there was a breeding program. I want to give people a reference here. If people want to get a feel for the abduction phenomenon, I think, in my opinion, the best resource that I've personally come across, and I've looked into this, and I've watched hours of presentations and read different books on the abduction phenomenon. And in my opinion, I think the most unbiased researcher was a woman by the name of Carla Turner. Carla Turner is dead. She died of a very, very aggressive form of cancer I think she was murdered with cancer, in other words. But Carla Turner wrote 3 books. She wrote a book called Taken, which details the abduction phenomenon. All of her books detail the abduction phenomenon, but Taken, I think it goes through the stories. I think 8 separate women details their lives and their abduction stories. Then she wrote Masquerade of Angels, which details the life of a gentleman named Ted Rice, which is fascinating, and his whole abduction, his whole relationship with the abduction phenomenon. And then I think the first one she wrote was Into the Fringe, which was the story of her whole family was abducted and was subjected to not only alien abduction but military abduction. And anyone who's interested in getting a feel for what the abduction phenomenon is about should refer to those books. I think that Carla Turner, she does a fantastic job, and she takes an objective view, even though she was an abductee herself. She tries to take an objective view, in many cases even a skeptical view, and she does a fantastic job of really documenting the details in a way that very few people have since Carla Turner's work. Now, I will give this disclaimer. Carla Turner, to my knowledge, was not a believer, so she did not have a biblical paradigm on the abduction phenomenon. That might have changed at the end of her life, because there are some clues in the books that lead me to suspect that Carla Turner may have uncovered the truth and received Jesus before she died. I don't know if that's true. I hope it is, but I'm not sure it is. Anyways, I just wanted to give that resource out there. Her books are free online in PDF, in a PDF format. People can type in Carla Turner books. They'll find them there for free. They're purposely free. Her husband made them free online after she died. So now the interesting thing is that in most abduction cases involving, I talked about last time we were on the radio, last time I was on the radio with you guys, I talked about artificial insemination. This is something that happens in many cases where women are abducted It's very common that a woman is abducted, subjected to the run-of-the-mill abduction scenario where she's taken out of her bed, consciously taken out of her bed by these little gray entities, which people refer to as gray aliens or alien grays. And they're the typical little guys with the big heads and the big almond-shaped eyes. They have that gray chalky skin. That's actually the kind of skin they have. I personally think they're biological drones, but that's for a whole other discussion. But anyways, they take these women and they take them up into their craft, and these women are usually laid out on a table similar to an operating table and are subjected to different medical procedures. In many cases, are subjected to some very erotic sexual procedures as well. And many times the women are artificially inseminated. And for those who don't know what artificial insemination is, it refers to the deliberate introduction of sperm, of any kind of sperm, into a female's uterus or cervix for the purpose of achieving a pregnancy through in vivo fertilization by means of something other than sexual intercourse. Most cases involve a syringe being plunged into the woman's uterus and this seed being artificially injected into their uterus. And the seed that's injected into these women is most often, appears to be most often the seed of either a hybrid entity or a entity related to the aliens that are abducting the woman. So basically, the woman is artificially inseminated. In some cases, the woman doesn't give birth. I mean, in most cases, the woman doesn't give birth. In some cases, the woman does give birth, and the military tracks a lot of this and has confiscated the evidence. But in some cases, the woman will have a miscarriage, and there have been documented cases where a woman has a miscarriage. And you referenced from the book of Esdras last time we were on the program, where it talks about your women shall give birth to monsters, a prophecy concerning the end times. And literally, these women, they discharge from their bodies in the form of a what do you call it when a baby comes out before it's supposed to and it's dead? I just lost the
premature or stillborn.
A miscarriage. So the woman discharges this creature in the form of a miscarriage, and it's not human. It's most often in a very ugly aberration. But in a lot of the cases, the women are pregnant. They're literally carrying a baby. They have verification from doctors and so forth that they're pregnant. And then suddenly, the baby in their womb is gone. It disappears. What happens is they're abducted again, and the baby is extracted from their womb. And many times, when a woman is artificially inseminated and carries a baby to term, and the baby disappears, the woman is abducted a couple of years later, or sometimes a year later, and introduced to the hybrid that came as a result of her pregnancy. And those hybrids, ironically, resemble the black-eyed children. In many cases, the hybrids resemble these black-eyed children, and they have many times, not always, there's different, depending on whatever they're using, whatever seed genetic material they're using that's mixing with the woman's egg, you're going to get a different result. But in many cases, you have these children with very abnormally large heads, abnormally large eye sockets. Their eyes are black. Their hair is usually scraggly. Most often it's blonde, but not always blonde. And they are almost always described as having chalky white skin and being pale and sickly looking. And when they speak, some of them are what's the term? They're telepathic. They're empathic or telepathic, and they sometimes they have the ability to speak using their mind, communicating with their mother, and sometimes they speak using their voice. And when they speak using their voice, Marcus, what do you think they sound like? Exactly as you described: monotone, robotic, somewhat human but not entirely human.
Yeah,
so
that was the description I was given. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, there's this hybridization program that I'm sure Ellie Marsuli had probably mentioned on your show, and there's this hybridization program that is underway and has been underway for a long time. And I have my own speculations as to why this program, what they're doing. A lot of people in the ufology community have different opinions. Many people think that what they want to do is integrate a new hybrid species into human society. They're trying to perfect a hybrid, a alien human hybrid, to where it can be flawlessly integrated into society without people knowing that they're there. I think they've done that. I think they have achieved that. I think we literally have walking among us hybrids that were the result of artificial insemination. And by the way, it goes both ways. The sexual stuff, men are oftentimes abducted and semen is extracted, and in many cases these men are subjected to sexual situations in which they're forced to have sexual intercourse with hybrid creatures, female creatures that are hybridized to look somewhat like human women, but are obviously not fully human. So it goes both ways. Let me tell you something. The data, referring to that hard data, that hard proof, the data concerning these abductions is so overwhelming. As I mentioned earlier, it is so incredibly overwhelming that your first reaction, if you look at it with an open mind and you approach it seriously, your first reaction is, how in the world has this remained hidden? Because there's so much data, there's so much information, so much eyewitness testimony, so much physical evidence. It is everywhere, but it has been carefully concealed from the eyes of the public, as so many things have. And people, the most ignorant question that I hear people, I was listening to the radio here in Montana, the local radio, the other day while I was driving home on a highway, and somebody called into a radio program because the hosts of the program were discussing ISIS and some political things concerning ISIS. And a gentleman called in and began to reference the Illuminati, began to reference the Luciferian agenda and the global elite and everything that's happening behind the scenes. And the hosts of the program began to instantly, almost as if it were programming, instantly began to mock the man. And the man was presenting his case eloquently.
Wow.
I mean, this man was presenting this case in such a succinct manner. He was laying it out within 2 minutes. I mean, I was very surprised. I thought he did a fabulous job in just 2 minutes, just laid out who's funding ISIS, why, what's going on behind the scenes, the global elite, and he did a fantastic job. And he was referencing facts. What do you think the response of these two talking political heads was? It was instantly to mock him. It wasn't to address the facts that he had brought up. It was instantly, as if they were programmed to just mock him. Of course, to throw the word conspiracy at him, to mock him, and basically the question that their big question was, there's no way that this kind of thing could be hidden. There's no way. There's no way. And now, it's interesting that a logical thinking human being would utter those words without taking a panoramic view of modern history and taking a look at all the things that were covered up and are covered up to this day, but especially the things that were cover-ups and came to light, how successfully they were covered up, how media has become a tool to absolutely brainwash people. Every form of media, by the way, music, television, movies, every form of media has been literally engineered. Listen, television was engineered not to entertain you, but to brainwash you. Okay? I can't go into the details now. Take my word for it or go do some research. television was engineered to brainwash people. It is, you are supposed to think a certain way, and if you don't question the way that you are innately brought up in your culture, then you are going to live your life with your eyes closed, because you're going to extract or derive all of your information about the world in which you live from the media. In the beginning, it was newspapers, which have always, for many years, have been owned by the ruling factions, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and so on, and have been manipulating the news. But then, of course, it went to an even grander medium, which was television. And that's why, by the way, that's why we've got so many crooked, despicable televangelists that have popped up, because television was engineered for lies and liars. And so it was the natural breeding ground for those kinds of despicable characters. And those are the kind of people that are promoted on that medium. And not to say that everything that comes across on television is wrong and evil, and of course people can use it for good and blah, blah, blah. I don't want to get into that conversation. But my point is that because of how dumbed down we are as a society now, a global society, but especially in the West, because of how dumbed down we are by media, it is supremely easy to pull a fast one on us. Supremely easy to mislead everybody. I mean, come on, Obama. I mean, the Obama administration is the greatest example of that. I mean, look at all the scandals that have. I mean, has the guy been pinned down on even one of the scandals yet? No. I mean, it's obvious that media is a tool to literally brainwash people into having a worldview that rejects the kinds of things that we're talking about tonight. But interestingly enough, these things are going to come to light, and they're going to purposely come to light in the future. The aliens, the UFOs, all the different technology that we've been deriving from them, or have been given by them, or have reverse engineered as a result of recovering their craft or shooting them down, which we can. And it's going to come out, but it's going to come out in a way that that they want it to come out, so that we walk away with the perception of the whole affair that they have engineered. It's called social engineering. They engineer the way that we act in its culture. They engineer the culture. When I say they, of course, there's different hierarchies at work. You've got a human faction at work, and then you've got a non-human faction at work, which, of course, we understand that the top of that hierarchy is Satan. And that's not Sunday school mythology. It's biblical fact. And you've got minds behind the scenes that are working on this stuff that are incomprehensible to the human mind. And I'm not aggrandizing the powers of darkness. I'm just pointing to raw facts. We ought to be able to be big boys and girls and deal with raw facts and reality. My God, we consume like gluttonous pigs. We sit there in front of televisions and consume all this crap, all this fiction all day long, believing whatever garbage that they tell us. We ought to be able to, as I said, be mature enough to digest and to deal with the truth when it comes across our plate. So, and I know that this kind of conversation offends people because, frankly, we've been engineered to be offended by truth. We've been engineered we've been engineered in such a way that when the truth is presented, our knee-jerk reaction is to doubt, illogically doubt. I mean, and then truth is presented to us in a skewed way. When they do present the truth to us, they present it to us in the form of a television program like Star Trek or Star Wars, where they're telling us what actually exists to some degree, but they're not telling us as if we're mature, respectable human beings. They're telling us as if we're idiots, as if we're cockroaches, as if we're undeserving to be spoken to directly about these things. That's part of the reason why they do that. Part of the reason is a very intentional contempt that they have for us, that those who are in the know, that the secret ruling factions, whether they be the military factions, the political factions, or the banking factions, know, they have the knowledge, and they make fun of us for being so blind and stupid and ignorant, and they feed our gluttony, they feed our ignorance. They don't want us to think logically. And if people would think logically, and if they would listen to a contention, whether it be a biblical contention or whether it be in contention involving something like alien abductions, when I say contention, I mean something that's contentious to their minds, rather than stepping back and saying, why is this contentious to my mind? Why is there a mechanism that seems to be built into the fabric of my mind that is repelling this without utilizing logic? In other words, why am I repelling this without analyzing it? Well, let me tell you why. It's called programming. Programming exists, and we've all been programmed to a degree. All of us have been programmed to a degree by culture at this point, and because we're dealing with a sophisticated technocracy. We're dealing with technocrats that are working with, that have access to technology that is 1,000 years in advance of what we have now. We can't even comprehend the technology that they're using to dupe us. Okay, let me say that again. We can't even comprehend the technology that they're using to fool us. So when we say, how could this be hidden for so long or whatever, we're not even able to analyze on a fair playing field how they're doing it, because we don't know exactly what they're using to do to pull the wool over everybody's eyes, except for to have the understanding that the media is involved, that churches are involved, that politics are involved. It is a brainwashing on a global scale. And remember, we are the postmodern generation. We live in the postmodern era. Hey, we're talking on a medium that's only existed for what, less than 100 years or something like that. No, I'm sorry. I was speaking as if we were talking on the radio. We're not. We're talking through the internet. So we're talking through a medium here that's only existed, since the 90s. Okay, so. Or since the 80s, if you want to count the government using it, the internet, before it went public. The government, of course, had developed a form of internet that they were using internally. So, in other words, we're using a technology that our grandparents, my grandfather, when he was a little boy, people were still using horses and buggies, right? Yeah. So, when my grandfather died, he was 94 when he died, or 95, and when he was born, when he was a little toddler, people were still using horses and buggies. I mean, cars were just starting to come out in the early 20th century, but a lot of people couldn't afford cars, obviously, and so horses were still. I mean, when my grandfather was a little boy, there were still cowboys, and it was still the wild, wild west in certain places of this country.
Right.
All right. So we take for granted where we have come in terms of this technological leap. And where did this technological leap come from? Just the astounding ingenuity of modern man? Bullcrap. Excuse my French. Yeah. But there's no way. It's not a matter of mankind suddenly having an epiphany and we develop all of this crazy technology, the Industrial Revolution and so forth. Now, the Industrial Revolution, by the way, okay, that's one thing. The Industrial Revolution and began to develop somewhat organically. I'll give you that, somewhat organically. But there came a point in time where we started just making leaps and bounds in certain technologies to the point where now all of our major technologies, informational technologies especially, are on an exponential growth curve. I referenced that last time I was on the radio with you. An exponential growth curve. And in other words, the technologies are doubling and tripling and quadrupling in their level of advancement every year. And I don't have all the exact data in front of me, but we're not growing incrementally in a linear fashion. We are making leaps and bounds in technology behind the scenes in many cases that are going to fundamentally change this planet and our human DNA in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years in ways that this planet has never before seen or witnessed. That's the reality in which we live. And the implications of what I'm talking about are massive, beyond what anybody can really comprehend. But yet, we take it for granted. Most people are just glued to their cell phones all day long, texting and Facebook, and here they are using all this technology, not really putting the pieces together. They're not engaging logically what the consequences are. They're using common core logic rather than traditional logic. 2 + 2 = 5. It doesn't equal 4 anymore. So they're not able to put together. And when I say they're not able, the majority of young people out there now who are so engrossed in this stupid society that we have now, the majority of these young people are no longer able to access the capabilities that they have innately as human beings. They're no longer able to. They've been dumbed down to such a degree, programmed to such a degree, that they are no longer able to access some of those faculties. Instead, they simply revert to technology to do the things that the human brain was supposed to do 100 years ago. And so they're actually losing the capability. I shouldn't say losing the capability. I should say they're actually losing the ability to utilize the capability that exists in the human brain. And I'm not talking about to basically use the force and make things levitate with your mind. I'm talking about the ability, the capability of critical thought, of logical analysis. Okay, it's dissipating in my generation, and especially in the generation behind me, and it's purposely being basically replaced with artificial intelligence, so that we don't have to use those faculties anymore, because all we have to do is rely on Google. Well, how dangerous is that? Because the computer is going to be thinking for us in the future, and not just on in terms of calculations, not just in terms of being a massive calculator to compute raw data that the human mind just isn't capable of computing, not in our fallen state anyway. So that's not the kind of processing that I'm talking about. I'm talking about processing basic information. In other words, people are going to have to turn to Google in 10 years to answer questions that they should have known in kindergarten. I'm serious.
Wow.
They are going to have to ask Google the questions that our teachers asked us when we were little kids and that we were supposed to be able to answer. Think about that. Because
we've been so dumbed down. Because
exactly,
we've been so dumbed
Google
down.
can tell them anything it wants to.
That's right. Again, more conditioning. Timothy, do you think that that's why they have the audacity to call us useless eaters, because we've been so duped as we eat the garbage they spit out to us every day?
Of course. Well, that's one of the reasons why they call us useless eaters, but the traditional use of the term useless eaters was for those who were not beneficial to society, so they were useless eaters. They weren't contributing enough to society to warrant being fed, to warrant eating food and living. Of course, that was a phrase that came out of Leninism and communism. But now you're right. Now it's not so much that we're not useful in society. Now we're useless eaters because we're not even really functioning like human beings anymore. And when I say we, obviously I'm not addressing you and your audience. Just the fact that people are listening to your show shows that proves that that's not the case for them. And obviously for the audience that listens to the Hagmans and Alex Jones and is searching for the truth and researching, obviously this doesn't apply to them. But for the majority of these people, people keep using the term zombie, and I'm going to get back to this abduction stuff and the black-eyed children here before we close this out. But people use the term zombie and zombified. Well, and some people use it tongue in cheek, and people snicker about it. And even my family jokes with me, and they always joke and say that I moved out to Montana to escape the zombie apocalypse. which isn't entirely false, but
right.
it's not true in the way they think it is. But
right.
listen, what else do you call a human being that is so spiritually and mentally dead that they have almost completely lost touch with what they were designed to be in the beginning, that they almost have that they've almost completely lost their capability to access the faculties that are innate in the human genetics. In other words, that they have brains just like everybody else, but they don't know. It's like a child. They don't know how to process thoughts anymore. They don't know how to process logic and be analytical and be linear in their thought process, because they've been bombarded with just asinine, ridiculous crap through television and Facebook. I tell my wife all the time, I always tell her, Facebook, people post lots of stuff on Facebook and try to wake people up, but I always notice that nobody cares if you post something on Facebook about aliens or giants or genetics. But if you post, and everybody knows this is true, if you post a 2-minute video or a 10-minute video about a cat eating ice cream, everybody will watch that video. And they'll watch it over and over and over, and they'll pass it around.
Right.
And why? Because that video is engaging the basest, most rudimentary mechanisms in your brain. But a video that talks about, that analyzes, that's analytical and logical, especially dealing with biblical doctrines or scientific stuff or genetics or giants or something like that, that kind of information engages a different part of your brain. It forces you to go to a different level in your thought process. And I'm gonna make a statement. People can't handle it anymore. They're not only disinterested in it, they are dysfunctional in their thought process at this point. They've lost the ability to digest and analyze that kind of information. And I didn't think like this 10 years ago, but I lived in Peru for 10 years, and after coming back here a few years ago and just analyzing the social climate of this country and of the Western world in general, it's scary. It's not even funny. It's scary what's happening to the human race. We think we're getting smarter because we know how to use technology. We know how to press buttons. We know how to press the buttons that allow technology to think for us. So therefore, we're smart. All those Neanderthals were so stupid, but look at us. We're so smart because we can put a post on Facebook. We know how to tweet, right?
Yeah.
But really, people don't understand that we are probably the dumbest generation of human beings. We may be the dumbest generation of human beings who ever have existed on this planet. Take away our technology, and man, I'll tell you what, we are in a pitiful state.
We'd be in trouble.
We're in a pitiful state. Take away our technology, and we are in a pitiful state. And I'm going somewhere with this, and I don't mean to rant here, but the idea here is that, referring back to the cover-up concerning the abduction phenomenon, we are no longer able, not we as in us listening to this show, participating in this show. I'm not referring to we. I'm referring to we as the human family collectively. We are not even able to process truth anymore, Marcus. And I'll tell you what, when you talk about preaching the gospel to people today, you need the anointing of the Holy Spirit, because people have to be supernaturally impacted. I'm talking about an awakening. They have to have the epiphany of the gospel that only God can give.
That's
because
right.
Most people are not even able to think on logical terms anymore, and that is my rant for the evening.
Well, let me just try to visit a couple of things here. You've done a superb job of bringing us to a point where we as believers tonight must understand and be willing to deal with these things that exist, and that don't exist. Timothy, the Lord, he gave me a couple things the other day, and I'm just going to throw a couple out and see if I can get your input on it. But, I think it was 2 days ago, the Lord just dropped in my spirit. He said, Marcus, you're going to see the creature feature generation. And it took me back, and I began just to, converse with the Lord and said, well, Lord, give me some insight as to what you mean by that. And he basically told me to look at the, bodily modifications that certain people in our society are engaging in. Some people are having their bodies modified to look like reptiles, snakes, vampires, or whatever. But what the Lord told me after that, he said, this is just the beginning of the worst that you're soon to see. Timothy, I don't know how much more aberrant it can become based on what we've already seen. But it obviously is going to become much more than we bargained for. And I think that right now we're under a full-scale Illuminati immersion in our society. And it has dumbed us down, so much. And, going back to the alien abduction scenario and the, breeding programs, even some perhaps conservative Christians would debunk, criticize, jest, laugh, or mock at these type of subjects. But, Brother Timothy, I know you know, and I trust others will learn that there have been people that have, like you said, paid the price of their own life for divulging these types of informations. And one that was brought to my mind, and you can go to, YouTube and they can look at this for themselves, but you're probably familiar with the name Phil Schneider. Can you just talk for a moment about that scenario and bring to the attention of our listeners? This man paid a price for his life about what he brought to the public.
Yes, Phil Schneider is an intriguing person. He's dead now. He was murdered. But
yes.
Phil, to give you a little bit of background, I have a video up on an Alberino analysis on underground bases, on DUMBs, deep underground military bases, in which I tell Phil's story, and then I let Phil tell his story on the video himself. I edited in one of his lectures so people can actually go to the Alberino analysis on the underground bases, deep underground military bases, and at the end of that analysis is Phil Schneider relating some of the information that he would commonly relay to people while he was on the lecture circuit. So Phil Schneider's father was a U-boat captain during the Nazi regime, and so his father was brought over to the United States under Project Paperclip, and so Phil had a history of being connected to some of these secret government programs, and his father was a brilliant man. He had ties to the Philadelphia experiment. People can Google that and see what that was about. But basically, Phil Schneider was an accomplished geologist, a structural engineer, and an explosives expert. And he worked on black budget projects for the United States military and multinational private contractors. Now, Phil possessed a level 3 Rhyolite 38 security clearance, which is a real security clearance, and which there were only a handful of civilians, because Phil was a contractor with the military. He wasn't actually in the military. So there were only a handful of civilians who held that Rhyolite 38 level 3 security clearance. And that security clearance gave Phil Schneider access to some of the stuff we're talking about tonight, information, access into some of those classified files that have the information of the stuff we're talking about tonight. And by the way, he had a near genius level IQ, and there's a lot of documentation. There was a lot of documentation proving that Phil was who he said he was. Most of it was confiscated, but it was out there long enough to where people had documented it, filmed it, taken photos of it before they confiscated it after they killed Mr. Schneider. But Phil's primary occupation involved the design and construction of deep underground military bases, or DUMBs, as they are known.
Right.
Including some of the most infamous installations on the planet, such as the Area 51 and S4 facilities in Nevada, as well as the Los Alamos and Dulce facilities in New Mexico. And I know, Marcus, you're familiar with the Dulce site in New Mexico. And
very much.
Basically, Phil, through a very bizarre circumstance, actually a very bizarre set of circumstances, discovered that there was a nefarious conspiracy involving an alleged collusion between factions in the United States military and a technologically advanced non-human race that was actually in possession of this of some of the technology that we've now reverse engineered. But not only that, but also we're living under the earth, some of these entities. It's not one, it's many, in caverns in the earth. And Phil has a particular story in which he actually encountered these entities while he was working on the underground base. I believe it was at the Groom Lake facility, and he was building an extra chamber to the underground base. By the way, these underground bases are miles below the surface of the earth. We're not just talking about an underground base that, you go down a few flight of stairs and you're in the base. We're talking miles under the ground.
Right.
Very high-tech facilities. And so Phil Schneider, basically, he was the one who determined, based on the rock sediment that they were dealing with and the rock formations that they were dealing with, he would have to determine what kind of explosives or what explosive package that he would use to break up the earth under the ground. And they were drilling down on this particular occasion. The government was there and all the geologists that were working. It was a top secret classified project. They were building onto the underground base, building some more chambers onto the underground base, and the drill kept getting hung up on something. It kept getting bent, or smoke was coming up, and the drill kept grinding to a halt, and it was encountering some kind of sediment that was unusual. So they sent Phil Schneider down the shaft, the drilling shaft, with, I don't know how many guys were with him. I know at least one. I think it was a Green Beret was with him.
Right.
And Phil Schneider had a little PPK pistol on him. And they were both in environmental suits, basically space suits. And they went down the shaft in the basket. They were lowered down the shaft to determine what kind of sediment they were encountering down there. Why was the drill coming up? By the way, there were foul stenches coming up too from this hole that they had drilled down. And I don't remember how far down, but it was far down in the earth. And basically, this basket went down with Phil and this military person in it in their environmental suits. And when they got down far enough, they came into an open space, an open cavern, and of course they had their lighting gear on them, their flashlights and whatever else gear they had. And what Phil found, shocked him, literally and emotionally speaking, and also physically speaking, because there was this cavern. And there were these entities. He said they were about 7 to 8 feet tall. I think that's, if I remember right, they were around 7 feet tall, if I remember his 7.5, something like that, his description. And they were almost a typical description of a gray alien, but tall. They were tall, larger forms, or what are known as the large grays. They were, with their chalky white skin, they were hideous. They stank. There was a very demonic atmosphere. And one of these entities, when Phil was lowered down the basket, and I know we're running out of time here, waved his hand in front of its chest, and Phil was actually struck with some kind of energy pulse or beam that literally burned off two or three of his fingers on one of his hands, and he uses the phrase crispy crittered his toes and gave him an aggressive form of cancer. And so Phil bore that evidence in his body, and the fact that he had these missing fingers, and everything he said was verifiable. Long story short, Phil Schneider was killed. There were 12 attempts on his life within 1 year or 2 years, and they got him on the 13th. and they killed him by choking him out, tying his hands behind his back and choking him out with a catheter, choking him to death after they tortured him and beat him up. So Phil Schneider, and there's some other stories there's a lot of stories involving Phil Schneider and his good friend El Bielek. People can Google Phil Schneider, El Bielek. Again, you're not going to get a biblical perspective on this stuff. You've got to go to the scriptures and find the biblical perspective on this stuff, and it's there, believe me. I just want to give that disclaimer. But Phil was an extraordinary person and a very brave person, and he walked around with artifacts, by the way, artifacts that came off of some of the reverse engineered, or some of the non-human technology, some of the craft, and some of the reverse engineered craft. He actually had artifacts. He had some metals that are not even on the periodic table, because the periodic table you're taught in school isn't the real periodic table. There's at least a dozen new elements that have been discovered because of our interaction with these non-human entities, and that of course they don't tell us about. Phil actually had some of these elements that he would bring around with him on the circuit, lecture circuit, and he had documentation proving his assertions, and basically they killed him and took everything. They took everything from him, and that's the story of Phil Schneider in a nutshell. Although Phil has hours and hours and hours of testimony online where he tells different fascinating stories concerning his work with these underground bases and his interaction with these non-human creatures.
Well, and I brought that up, Timothy, to validate your point that people do pay a high price for coming forth, with truth, and Phil happened to be one of them. Everything that he had in his residence after he was murdered was seized, taken, and hidden. And like you said, it involved items, but also very copious notes and validation of things that he had come across and been privy to.